Good morning, gearheads, and welcome back to Formula One. The summer break is over, and we just watched some qualifying. And this is Jon Massengale. I'm joined by Bob Varsha. Mr. Varsha, how are you, buddy? Formula One is
I'm
back.
yeah, boy, I've got to tell you, I've been doing this for 35 years or more now. The summer break hasn't been a part of the calendar all that time, but I cannot recall a summer break that seemed to last longer than this one. I think it was because, there wasn't a whole lot going on the surface that fans would like. A lot of business related stuff and a few driver signings and so forth, but nothing in the way of real attention grabbing stuff. And it was like, come on. How long has it been? 6 weeks, 8 weeks? Let's get these guys on track again.
I completely agree with you. I completely disconnected. Chris and I had the wheel to wheel show, but we actually pre-recorded a couple of those. So
Uh-huh.
I was completely disconnected. I was tinkering on cars, enjoying the family, and I really did disconnect. But man, what a great way to come back with Zandfoort, and what a cool circuit by the sea, and Lando
Mm-hmm.
Norris with a monster pole lap over Max Verstappen. Man,
Yeah.
wow! Hey,
Well, we talk about it all the time. Changing conditions make things worse for the teams and drivers, but better for us as fans. And I think this was a classic example. They had heavy rain on Friday, and then they had some sunshine, and then a big crash and some wet track this morning. So everybody is trying to figure out what the proper setup should be for their car. And it's not always there. And the track has been rendered green by all the rubber being washed off. So watching these guys all struggle. I mean, we've seen Max Verstappen off the track and on during the course of the weekend. We saw some vicious lurches there of oversteer, snap oversteer, while these guys are trying to wring a lap time out of the car. It's just fascinating to watch. And then, as you said, for Lando Norris and the McLaren to come out there and just stone everybody by 4/10 of a second is just phenomenal.
it really was. And I was thinking about Lando. You mentioned about before we came on the air. It's like how he's kind of been in his own head talking about how he's not doing this and that. It's really, it's time for him to put all that to bed, isn't it?
Yeah, I mention the comment all the time that Sir Frank Williams said all the top drivers are mean bastards because they have to be. You have to be selfish. You have to be demanding of yourself as well as the team. But Lando just has this reputation as a great guy. And, let's go play golf, and he gets on himself so badly. It seems to me. He said last week, I think he said, "I'm just not driving like a world champion should." And well, the hell you're not. I mean, lighten up, take it, as it comes, and look what you can do with that car, that team, which is operating on all six cylinders now. It used to have eight, and the 10, and then 12. McLaren is just looking phenomenal right now, and both Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris are at the top of their game. I mean, it's just fun to watch. And I would say, listening to that post qualifying interview from Oscar Piastri, he seems like a changed guy too. To me, he just seems so calm. I mean, he looks like a real pro now. He's not, a recent rookie who's just finally finding his feet. He seems to really able to chew on the situation and give you a personal perspective that he believes in what he's doing, what the car is doing, what he needed to do better. But he's doing it in a way that Lando Norris was not. Lando was sort of, oh, I did this, I screwed up, I suck. Whereas Oscar is like, well, yeah, then this caught me off guard and that shouldn't have happened. And I need to blah, blah, blah. So anyway, maybe I'm just making too much of it, but it sure is fun to watch. And this racetrack is fun to watch.
Yeah, speaking of this racetrack, we haven't really talked about it in the last couple of years. I don't think on our show, but
Uh-huh.
I really like watching that the apex, where the apex is located on like turn 3, where you're
Mm-hmm.
so used to seeing the apex on the inside of the corner, and on that corner that's banked so high, that's got such a steep bank, the apex is way up high. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, yeah. Well, Martin Brundle's tried to explain it a couple of times. If you're not used to high performance driving, you want to use as little of the racetrack as possible, the shortest lap you can make by getting right down to the apex, which is where you get off the brake and onto the power. But this track is wide, and it has this banking that allows you to carry so much speed into the corner that you don't want to be down there by the inside curb because you have to pinch the corner too tight. You stay up high, wide, and handsome with your foot close to being flat on the floor, and you go faster over the longer distance, and you net an advantage in lap time. So yeah, that's fun. And it's fun to hear these guys talk about what a monster at banking it is. It's like 18 degrees, I think, which is midway between Indianapolis at 108 degrees and Talladega at 36 degrees. So if those folks came over and stopped down the road from me here in Atlanta and saw the Talladega Super Speedway banking, they would their eyes would pop out of their heads.
Well, let's talk about this qualifying session, because we talked about Lando Norris having a monster lap, 3.5 tenths ahead of Max Verstappen. And, there's a couple things going on, and we'll talk about all that. But Piastri, you said he seems confident, but Lando's a full half a second ahead of Piastri. Yeah. I mean, and that's a huge difference for your, in Formula One and on over your teammate in the same hardware.
Yeah, and that's a real shot across the bow of Red Bull, of course, because we've seen that gap from the Red Bull to the rest of the field getting smaller and smaller. And boy, oh boy, what Lando Norris did in qualifying gave everybody something to think about, but certainly Red Bull.
Yeah, and there's definitely some surprises we're going to talk about, including Mercedes. There's been so much discussion about them, but I hear Chris Medland's microphone lighting up out in Zandfoort. Hey, Mr. Medland, how are you?
I am very good, chaps. How are we doing? Good to be back.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. It was great to be back in a long summer break.
Yeah, I mean, it never feels long, I'll admit, when you're doing all the traveling to each race, because it's just, you get 2 extra weeks at your own home for once. And you still generally, people get on a plane to try and get a holiday in. But it is really good to be back based on, I'll admit, the way this weekend has panned out so far. You spend so much time running around the paddock, trying to talk to people, kind of catching up on things. We had different bits of breaking news. We had Jack Doohan confirmed that Alpine, obviously Carlos Sainz reacting to his Williams move. And suddenly qualifying starts. And you think, oh, hang on, there is sporting action that we need to focus on here. It's not just talking about the news. So
that's right. We're not ready yet.
Yeah, exactly. Need another week to focus on all that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Chris, it was a great way to come back to Zandvoort for us anyway. I'm assuming, it's been a little rainy and the weather's been a little cool, but it's a little warmer today, right?
Much warmer right now. It's lovely here, actually, at the moment. It's I'm trying to think if I can do my conversions quickly enough, but the sun's come out. The wind has finally calmed down. I'm getting pinched by the latest driver to join the grid, by the way. Jack Doohan, excited for 2025?
Are you just listening to music in the headphones and walking around with a microphone?
You're live across North America, sir.
I'm very grateful and very happy to be on the grid next year, and I really appreciated good questions in the written media.
Yeah, so we did a kind of print pen earlier today, and I asked him about the fact that basically he doesn't get to drive the car again in FP1 this season. He just gets to fly overnight to races, having been in the sim. But Jack is confirmed for next season. Just a 1-year deal, is it at the moment?
At the moment, I have a future plan with Alpine, so at the moment it's for 2025, but I look to cement myself, further.
Well, how does it feel to be able to say you've got it? Because you've been working hard on this. You spoke to us on the show before about how much you were just keeping your head down, focusing on what you could control and trying to put yourself in position for a seat. But to get it, how good does that feel?
It was so good, man. We've been working so long for this, and for it to finally, have materialized, I'm so grateful. I'm just taking the opportunity with open arms and going to make sure that I don't leave any stone unturned and really hit the ground running.
Well, we look forward to seeing how you get on. I know you're nearly back of the team, and I've got to go and talk about qualifying. And you get to do that next year, but not right now. So the other 20 get my focus.
Compete in it.
Oh, you definitely will, mate.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah, that's interesting that it's a 1-year deal for now. I'd love to see that contract because most teams shy away from that, given that you've got one transition year next year, and then you're into the whole new rules set, all new cars, significantly different from the ones we have now in 2026. Why would you sign a guy up for just 1 year? Sure, you want to, see him out there in action and see if he's got the goods, in which case maybe there's a big team option to sign him up for a longer term. But that's interesting that they put him out there on a 1-year deal.
Well, it's partly because they do want to just kind of see how the driver market plays out. Something that Flavio Briatore said today was that they were trying to get Carlos Sainz, but he was not bothered at all by the fact they didn't get him because he said, we don't have the car yet. We're not good enough. It doesn't matter who we put in there. Carlos wouldn't get us massively better results until we give them the car to do so. Now, what Jack gets to do is prove that he's worthy of being in the car when it's better. So I kind of understand it. If he does struggle, then maybe you could attract someone else if your car has improved a lot. But at the same time, I think it would have been a nice show of faith to have at least made it sound like a multi-year deal, which is what most teams do, don't they? They say it's a 1+1 or something, and they make a big song and dance about it. But no, he got told at the start of the summer break and has been able to focus on his preparation since then. But I did think it's a surprise that he's not getting any FP1s between now and the end of the year as it stands. I think best preparation would be as much track time in the most current car as you can get, because it's also opportunities on circuits he'll race on next season.
For sure. Hey, while we're on the subject of Alpine, Chris, tell me if you've heard this rumor, and that's all I'll call it at this point as a rumor. The proverbial little bird told me recently that Alpine, as we all know, wants to get out of the engine business. I've heard that they have been approached by General Motors, by the Cadillac brand, to acquire the Alpine. I don't know if they're going to get the whole Viri complex where they build their engines, or just the intellectual property to make Formula One quality engines, and whether that's a standalone effort. We know Cadillac said, we're not going Formula One racing without Andretti Global, but this might be a door opener to allow Andretti Global to step up and maybe make negotiations with Alpine about acquiring the team. Who knows? But have you heard anything about outreach from GM to Alpine?
Not directly, no. I can kind of work backwards from that. Is that today Briatore made very clear that the team is not for sale and says Renault will never sell the team. And Luca De Meo, the Renault chairman, is adamant that he will never sell. He never wants to sell that team. But you're right that they are ending or working to end the power unit kind of department and the work that goes on at Viri. Now, I do believe it would be sensible if Cadillac were to come in, and therefore, I guess it would mean Andretti would have to get themselves a spot on the grid, that you can fast track some of your work by taking over the IP of an existing manufacturer. I don't think we'd see it happen in terms of them being able to get up and running for 2026 without just buying Viri. And let's be honest, how tricky would that be for an American company to then buy a French company, and run it from across the other side of the Atlantic? It would be complex, but also with labour laws in France, I just don't know if it would happen quickly enough to allow it to kind of finish the work in time for 26. But I haven't also heard that that's not happening, if that makes sense. Sometimes these kind of rumours do spark up, and someone says, oh, by the way, if you hear that, it's rubbish. I haven't heard that either. It's not been shut down.
Well, Cadillac is a French name after all.
May we?
Hey, Chris.
All right.
Hey, Chris, I like it when Jack stumbled up on you and he said he was just chatting with you. And then when you said, by the way, you're live across North America, he immediately jumped into his professional voice.
His corporate mode. Yeah, that's right.
Wait a minute. He was genuinely pinching me. He does it quite a lot. He'll just see someone he knows and he'll just he looks for your love handles. He's like, trying to make the point that he's this elite athlete and you've got nothing you can grab on him, but that he can do it to you. He mocks me for my running times when I run the track. And I don't think I'm that slow, but yeah, he's always, I quite often get like an Instagram message from him that's just a snail emoji, which I think is a bit harsh, really.
Oh, tell him, the famous comment from publisher William Randolph Hearst: never argue with somebody who buys ink by the barrel. Because someday Jack Doohan's going to have to face you from across that microphone, and revenge will be yours.
He's normally quite good. I've hosted a few press conferences with him in Formula 2 before, and not when it's always gone well. Top 3 normally means he's not had a bad day, but he's not always been in a great mood either. And he's a good talker. He's honest, he's analytical, but he's feisty. I'm looking forward to seeing him in F1, I must admit, because I don't think he's going to be someone who just kind of goes about his business quietly. I think we're going to see and hear a lot from Jack Doohan next year, as long as the car is semi-competitive.
Well, that apple didn't fall far from the tree then. His dad, Mick, was famous for wearing his heart on his sleeve, and he would pull no punches.
Yeah. Hey, let me run down the full qualifying here because I want to talk. There's plenty to talk about. There's some really big surprises too. Of course, Lando Norris with that huge lap over Max Verstappen, 3.5 tenths, followed by Lando Norris's teammate Oscar Piastri, then George Russell in the Mercedes, then Checo Perez down in fifth, a good top five for Checo, and then Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, Fernando Alonso in seventh, Albon in eighth, nice for Williams, Lance Stroll in the other Aston in ninth, Pierre Gasly in 10th, Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari in 11th. Lewis Hamilton, one of the surprises for sure in both of those, Carlos Sainz. Yuki Tsunoda down in 13th. Nico Hulkenberg, Kevin Magnussen, Daniel Ricciardo, Esteban Ocon, Valtteri Bottas, and then Zhou Guanyu. And then, of course, Logan Sargent, who we have not mentioned, had that massive crash early on this morning in practice 3. And that was just a very unusual spot and a huge crash followed by a fireball. And what was fascinating to me, Bob, was how he didn't realize it. And, they showed on the pre-race show how he was just sitting in the car and not hurrying to get out of the car. And his team radio said, "Get out. The car is on fire." That was crazy.
Right. Yeah, I remember many years ago in our days on Speed Vision, working with David Hobbs and Steve Matchett, someone caught fire and, nobody got hurt, but Steve's droll, typical Formula One veteran response, "Dude, the car is on fire," which must have been what the pit lane was telling their driver. Yeah, that was weird. And the fire seemed to start at both ends of the car, which I thought was a little bit weird.
Yeah.
But what the heck?
Yeah. Hey, Chris, have you had a chance to stop by Williams? And I know it's just bad timing for this crash for Sargent after upgrades, right?
Yeah, big time. It's funny you say that. I'm stood opposite Williams right now, but I'm not alone. There's quite a few TV crews around here. And yeah, I'm hoping to speak to James Vowles if I can get him. Just keeping my eyes open. Actually, just seen Mike Crack, who's congratulated Jack Doohan, who we were speaking to earlier, on his seat as he's walked by. But yeah, I'm going to see if Vowles will speak to us if he emerges from the Williams motorhome, because it would be interesting to get the Williams take on today. That would have been an expensive crash. And as you say, it was an upgraded car. They said that Logan had most of the major upgrades on the car. But at the same time, Alex Albon put that car into Q3. And I believe off the top of my head, did he put it 7th or 8th on the grid? It was top 8. Can't remember which of the two positions it was. But
yeah, Albon's an 8th.
Yeah, Albon's 8th.
Yeah, so a good chance of points there from that position, because assuming it's dry tomorrow, which is a bit of an assumption, and even if it is dry, the wind is still strong, so you could see mistakes made. But it is a tough place to overtake, certainly in the dry, and I think that Williams looks quick enough to ensure that he can stay there in the top 10. And Albon is a driver we've seen put some brilliant defensive drives in once he's in the points. So speaking of him, Albon himself is just getting to the motorhome, although I believe he's a bit too busy to stop for a chat, but hopefully that means if James Vowles is around, we might be able to grab him in a sec. So I will do my usual stalking, as I like to tell everyone, which is honestly is not sinister.
The stalker. We're going to have T-shirts made for you.
Yeah. Hey, Bob, were you a little surprised? I mean, obviously the big surprise to me was Hamilton and Sainz not making it into Q3. But I also, when we were watching the end of the qualifying and we saw Lando jump to the top, I kind of thought George Russell might sneak in above Max Verstappen. So I was a little surprised to see him down in 4th. But those, with the Mercedes, the upgrades that they've had and the expectations after a good practice 3, I thought Mercedes might be quicker.
Yeah, I think so too. I can't help but state that both Hamilton and Sainz are outgoing members of the team. So whether they lose some priority in terms of the availability of fresh parts, maybe you don't want a guy who's not going to be here next year to see the latest and greatest that you're using. Because one of the teams pointed, is McLaren, who, as fans know, you get a certain amount of wind tunnel and computational fluid dynamics or CFD time to work on your car. If you were less successful last year, you get more time to prepare next year's car. And if you are successful, you get less, as trying to level the playing field. Given the amount of time they have and the success they had with the very limited upgrades they made in the first half of the season, suddenly McLaren has this wealth of research and development time to work not only on this year's car, which of course is in the thick of the battle for the team champion, the manufacturers championship, constructors championship is the word I'm looking for. They can also do work on next year's car, and that's a bonus.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but it's
the cars aren't going to change considerably for next year, but McLaren's definitely in the catbird seat right now.
Yeah, at one point I thought we might be looking for another front row lockout for McLaren, but you could just never count out Max Verstappen. I mean, I'm going to quote you all season long how you said you think Max is just worth a few tenths over everybody in the field.
Yep.
Can't argue with
that. Well, if you saw the onboard shots of him, the car getting snap oversteer everywhere. He's struggling. And I saw an article this week that argues that perhaps Red Bull has, reached the ceiling of the development on this car. That it's just there's not a whole lot more it can give within the rules and the updates and the available budget and time and all the things I talked about previously. So it's interesting. I think this latter half of the season is going to be terrific fun to watch. And let's not ignore our friends at Haas, by the way. I think they did great to get both cars into Q2, considering they're maintaining their race car in handcuffs, as it were.
Yeah, we got plenty to talk about that. Hey, Chris, we need to take a break. I know you're stalking the Williams team over there. Should we grab a break, or are you about to get somebody?
No, we're good to go. It sounded like it might be tricky to get him tonight. So I'm going to reposition for McLaren and see if our very own, as I like to call him, Zach Brown, the American team boss, will speak to us as well. But I saw him running in to do meetings as well just now. So I think everybody's on a tight time schedule at the moment. But when they've had a good day, hopefully they'll talk to us. So we can go for a break, and then I'll hopefully have better news when we come back.
All right. You're listening to Speed City. We'll be back after these messages. All right, let's check out YouTube and see what's going on, ladies and gentlemen out here. Kevin Kelly, TW, Andy P, Mike Bowles, Todd Dauber. Got a lot of the usual suspects. There's TW and Crazy says, Kevin Kelly, I'm extremely happy for Alex. That was awesome. Yeah, Carlos might be getting into an awesome team next year. Kevin Kelly, I'm going to have to disagree with something, and I'm probably in the minority here. Kevin Kelly says, I like the gimbal shots. This.
Oh, I love them. Yeah.
I don't. I think the problem is I'm in my studio and I got these big monitors. It's almost like I'm getting a little nauseous, like seasick when I'm watching those things. I don't know if that's just me, but.
It worked.
Yeah, exactly. I think part of it as well is to actually hammer home that point. Think of what the drivers are going through, because they're feeling that as well as seeing it that way. Yeah. It's trying to kind of encapsulate the G-forces and all the undulations and elevation changes. So, I'm sure it would be a more comfortable viewing experience for you without it. But at least it gets that point through.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is cool technology, because it's just amazing how it looks so smooth. You're, going through all those corners.
Yeah.
And of course, this is the perfect place to do this, right? With these huge banked corners.
Right.
Oh, spot on. Yeah.
Semi-huge.
The last one, especially. Yeah. The final. It's not quite Indy. But it's actually not far off.
Yeah, it's bigger than Indy, but less than places like Daytona and Talladega. NASCAR broadcasters have been using these gimbal cameras for a long time. To the same effect, you see that the car banks into the corner, but the camera stays vertical, as it were, so you can, really get the sense of how steep that banking is. I love this track for just that reason, the banking.
Here we go.
Hello to everyone, this is Gunther Steiner, this is Speed City. Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
All right, where will you be next weekend for Labor Day weekend? How about the Lone Star Le Mans, that Circuit of the Americas? It's going to be a fantastic weekend here in Austin, Texas for the Lone Star Le Mans. We have the World Endurance Championship coming back to COTA for the first time since 2020. And what a great weekend, because it's going to be Labor Day weekend. We're going to have a 6-hour wheel-to-wheel race. Some of the greatest car manufacturers in the world bring the cars that race in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and they're all coming to Circuit of the Americas. You've got Alpine, Aston Martin, BMW, Cadillac. You've got Lamborghini, Ford, Mustang. They have the Mustang series, Lexus, McLaren. It's going to be an amazing.
Ferrari.
Yeah, and Ferrari. And you got the Formula World Champion Jenson Button, and another world champion you might have heard of, Valentino Rossi's going to be racing in this. So it's going to be an amazing race. Those two support races, the Lamborghini and the Mustang, and you got a Texan, Ben Keating, racing in it. So it's going to be a fantastic weekend. They've got a huge fan zone to enjoy car displays, entertainment. It doesn't get better. You can check out all the action at Circuit of the Americas next weekend, Friday, August 30th through Sunday, September 1st, the Lone Star Le Mans. All right, guys, let's talk some Formula One now. Bob, we were talking about, during the break, we're talking about the gimbal camera and how that's an interesting view. But this is I think the reason they brought it here was the banking. That's such a great place to come back to. But Max Verstappen's won every race here at his home race since they've come back to Zandfoort, these last three. But I don't know. I don't know if I would predict Max to win this one with as fast as McLaren's are and some competition in the other cars too.
I agree. I mean, we've seen what a handful the car was for Max during qualifying. When he's in the turbulent air of all 20 cars out there at the same time, it may be more than even his incredible skills can manage. So it's going to be interesting. Back in my days calling kart and champ car, we'd go to some tracks and we would often discuss the fact that the cars had gotten too big, too fast, too heavy, too whatever for some of the places they raced. I was also covering the Toyota Atlantic Series in those years. And there were a lot of places, let's say Mid-Ohio for one, where the Atlantic cars, smaller, lighter, less powerful, but still, very quick, would seem more suited to the racetrack. And I kind of get that feeling when I watch the current generation of Formula One cars going around Zandvoort. It's tight. These cars are bigger and heavier than they've ever been. They just seem maybe a little too much for the racetrack, which is not in itself a bad thing. I mean, you want the drivers to have a significant challenge, and having too much car for the track is one of those challenges. But, I think in 2026, when we're going to have smaller, lighter cars, they'll look even better at this track. It's very, challenging, let's say, not dangerous, because everything is cramped together. Nobody knows that better than Chris Medland. The walls are never very far away. The gravel traps are fairly small. Many of the offs we've seen this weekend have resulted in contact with the tire walls. So it's it's a real driver's track in so many different ways, with so many great television angles for us all to enjoy.
Yeah, Chris.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right that you could say that the cars are too big for the track, but that was always going to be the case, actually. When Formula One was coming back here, I remember the announcement that they were looking at it, and everyone being like, how are they going to fit an F1 car around there? That place is too small. But that is why they did such a good job with that banking, and why they did such a good job with the redevelopment of this circuit. And that first sector, especially, the way that they've maintained the flow, using the sand dunes still. There are kind of adapted parts of the track that feel a little bit clunky, maybe. But I was saying, I like the way the lap finishes, actually. There's the tight right-hander before the longer left that's in like a stadium section, just adds atmosphere. And it like during a race, even when you're not seeing overtaking moves happening all the time, when you've got cars fighting closely, the fans are loving it, and you've got them on top of the cars, it does make for a spectacle still. Whereas we do go to other places where everything's so set back, so spacious, so much runoff, you are kind of detached from it a bit too much. So, I do think they've done a good job with it. Probably a better job than I actually expected them to do, because the banking, especially the last corner, which is 18 degrees. I've just double checked. So that pretty much kind of matches the start finish line at Daytona, because you mentioned that, Bob, about kind of the differences. Mm-hmm. But that does basically create a straight that wouldn't have been there, because it's easy flat. Yeah. The drivers aren't really thinking about it, but it means that you can stay close. You don't lose any aero performance through that corner. So, a really good example of what can be done when you get a bit creative, actually. But I would also say, when you're designing a track to only really fit F1, everyone else, they assume, will work here, but they've gone, right, these are the changes we have to make for it to work for Formula One, which is an expensive gamble, because, of course, if this place were to lose the Grand Prix, that's a lot of money they've put down that then that they're not going to get a return on anymore once the race leaves. So, you've got to make sure you keep that spot.
Hey, speaking of this, what about some of the traffic? We heard Checo Perez call Lewis Hamilton an idiot, calling a 7-time world champion an idiot because of traffic on track. And then, of course, Lewis Hamilton and Carlos Sainz. I wonder, Chris, do you think that traffic was a factor in both of those guys not making it through to Q3?
To be honest, no, I don't. I think Ferrari just weren't that competitive. I'm still dangerously close to the team's motorhomes here to be saying this, but I don't think they look that good this weekend. Admittedly, Fred Vasseur said he expected that a little bit as well. He said it was damage limitation coming here for Ferrari, that they've got to stay close to kind of the top teams and not lose too much ground, because he thinks the next 3 races, Monza, Baku and Singapore, will suit them much more. But add in that Carlos had a gearbox issue today, so he lost out on a lot of running. Then that meant that the team were on the back foot a little bit more. We had wet FP3, dry qualifying. It's just been a difficult weekend for any team to get it right. But if you lost out on any track running, you were on the back foot. Hamilton surprised me. He'd looked comfortable. He'd looked good for most of the weekend. And then Q2 came around and that first run wasn't good. And then the second run even less so. And to not get through into Q3, that was a shock. The radio message he got as well, there was no talk of traffic. There was no complaint from him. And then his race engineer, Bono, kind of said, it's really tight there in that pack. 4.5 tenths off the quickest time is all you are, but that knocks you out. It's like, but he's 4 tenths off his teammate, off George Russell in the same car. We know Lewis Hamilton is more than capable of doing that lap time. So strange one, that, because it seemed just to only become an issue. He only struggled in Q2, and we'll have to see what he says about it. But he is off to the stewards, I must say, at the top of the hour about that Perez impeding. They have summoned him, so in about 20 minutes he will be speaking to the stewards about that one, and that would be even more painful if he was to get a grid penalty on top of where he's qualified already.
Yeah. And Carlos Sainz did have a radio message where he, right at the end of qualifying, he said, Hulkenberg wasn't very generous there, and his team radio reply was, he stayed in front of you the whole high-speed corner. So that was one thing that triggered me to think about that. But also, Checo Perez wasted basically a set of tires, didn't he?
Well, exactly that. That's why it's still being investigated, basically, with what happened with Hamilton, because some people would say, but Perez got through, so why does it matter? But he got through by using a new set of tires, because his lap before had been ruined by potentially getting impeded, is what they will claim. So it's that knock-on effect, means you have fewer new sets of tires going into Q2 or Q3. So the knock-on impact is actually damaging to your final qualifying position, even though that incident happened in Q1. So that's why they still will look at it. But for a split second there, I did feel for Perez in the sense that there's a lot of scrutiny on him still, a lot of pressure. Red Bull have been quite defensive about their decision to stick with him over the summer break, so he needed to deliver. And assuming that was a clear case of impeding, if we call it that, if he can say, yes, I had to abort my lap because of Lewis, and then he had to use a new set of tyres, that's through no fault of his own, is it? That's not down to the way he's performing, that he then could have his qualifying result compromised.
Yeah. Hey, some other stories here. Daniel Ricciardo out-qualified by Yuki Tsunoda again. I don't know the scorecard on that qualifying, but Daniel Ricciardo out in Q1, and Yuki Tsunoda qualified 13th, Daniel Ricciardo down in 16th. Bob, what do you think about that? And, amongst that and the driver situation, the silly season and all that for next year?
Well, good point. I think when you're looking at Perez and Ricciardo, it's like two drivers trying to get out of their seats in Formula One. I saw a comment from Helmut Marko recently in which he said, Liam Lawson, their reserve driver, has been promised a seat next year. So we know he will go into either Perez or Ricardo's seats as things currently stand. As to who that's going to be, we know that Red Bull is capable of making some curious decisions, let's say, by keeping Perez for the second half of this miserable season he's suffering through. So it's going to be interesting to see, and everybody's going to be watching those two drivers in two different teams that share the same ownership to see where Lawson is going. But that apparently has been a line drawn in the sand. The young New Zealander is going into one of the Red Bull cars next year. When the music stops playing, grab a seat.
Hey, Chris,
Well,
we've heard
to follow up on that.
We've heard that before. What do you think?
We have, but also then Christian Horner went on Sky TV yesterday and was like, no, I spoke to Helmut and he clarified, and he didn't say being one of ours. We have options on him. We have to take them up by a certain time. And if we don't, he's free to go elsewhere. So he might end up doing something like that, or we could place him in any other seat if we want to. But basically was saying, no, it doesn't mean he's going in the RB or the Red Bull. I
Really?
found it odd. I think that was back to the old power struggle of what Marco says and what Horner says, and maybe they don't all match up at the same time. So it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. I'll admit I was told we weren't going to get Zach Brown this afternoon because he was in back-to-back meetings, but I've just seen him come to try and congratulate his drivers on their qualifying performance in the TV pen, and I'm trying to chase him when he leaves in amongst a scrum of people. So apologies if you catch some random shouting at people in this next few minutes, but if I suddenly interrupt, it's because I've managed to get him.
Well, he's always looking for a microphone when his driver's on pole, so you might get him.
Yeah, but he's got a lot of mail and email to catch up on because he was at the IndyCar race in St. Louis, and then he was out at Monterey, California, driving his plethora of absolutely spectacular vintage race cars. Yeah, Zach has certainly piled up some air miles in the last couple of weeks.
Speaking of that, Jonathan Green's not with us today. He was commentating that last weekend, and this weekend he's doing Trans Am. He'll be back with us next weekend if anybody's missing Mr. Green, just like me. But hey, Chris, we're at a point where we need to take a break, but we won't if you think you got Zach.
No, I think you're good to go. I will jump off if I need to, but it's going to be hard to grab him. I'm just going to give it a go.
All right. You're listening to Speed City F1, and we'll be back after a quick break. All right, let's take a look on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen out there. Somebody said, Joe Voice is flexing. He's watching on a 50-inch TV. He says it's awesome. He says, my seasickness, this is my problem. And you're right, Joe. It's me. Let's see what else. Todd Dauber says,
I'd like to see it from the Sphere in Vegas.
Yeah. Todd Dauber says, Ruth Buxton. What's her last name? Not Buxton.
Buscombe. Buscomme. Mm-hmm.
On F1 TV, thought Lewis was on a different car setup than George, more downforce. Yeah, maybe so. Yep.
Maybe. Mm-hmm.
Andy P says Larson may get loaned out though. Yeah. So Joe says the TV was on sale. I'm just giving you a hard time, Joe.
Hey, you're smart if you bought it on sale.
Yeah.
Because the technology is going to change next week anyway.
I know. This TV behind me is a 54, and I think I bought this for like $260 or something like that.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was cheap. I think I paid more for my monitors than my TV behind me. Let's see. Anybody else? Todd replying to Andy says, talking about Larson, how would he end up with a drive in F1? Yeah, good point about Larson. I mean, Lawson, there's been so much talk about him. He's almost as much as Kimi Antonelli, by the way. It feels like leading up to the last 2 years with Antonelli. And Chris, I'm assuming Antonelli is pretty much a given, right, for Mercedes?
It's sounding very much like that. I believe, and this is secondhand info, but I believe at some point someone, it might be Bono, spoke about wanting to work with George and Kimi or something like that. And I think, kind of let slip. Nothing's been officially announced, but I'm expecting soon FP1 in Monza to be, at least.
All right, here we go.
Hi, this is Max Verstappen, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
Welcome back to Speed City. It's Jon Massengale, Bob Varsha, Chris Medland, and thank you, Max Verstappen, for bringing us back. And I'll never forget when we recorded that. It was here at COTA. Max was just the consummate gentleman with us, giving us time to interview him. And the bumper that you just heard there, Max was just the opposite of the fiery Max that you hear on track sometimes. Hey, Chris Medland, let's talk about the Haas F1 thing, because we had some Dutch officials, putting some stickers maybe on the Haas F1 equipment, ready to take it away from them?
Well, yeah, something along those lines. So I'm using one hand to try and message to line up an interview and one to answer you. It was bailiffs were in on Thursday night. They were in to try and basically itemize everything that is currently here at the track, because Uralkali, the former title sponsor of the Haas F1 team, the Russian company, was basically it won a dispute in a Swiss arbitration court that says it was owed sponsorship money back from Haas. So when Haas terminated their sponsorship deal back in 2022 with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they had already been paid some money in advance for that year. And while that all played out, and you can't move money very easily between anywhere in Russia at the moment, Haas still had that money. So they were told by the Swiss court, you have to give that money back. That was in June this year. Haas didn't dispute that. They said, yep, sure, okay, fine. And then it hadn't happened up to now. So Uralkali basically had worked out certain places that they could use law, the way the law is in each country that F1 is racing, to try and just step up the pressure, because they're like, come on, you're meant to have paid us by now. And this was one such place. So they have jurisdiction to keep Haas here if they really want, until they receive their money. Now, Haas, the F1 team, rather than Haas Automation, I believe we're kind of like, no, this was actually not to do with us. We thought it was being resolved by America, but we'll get onto it now. We'll get it sorted. We've got the money. And as far as I'm aware, the money has been paid. They are, we haven't had official confirmation that it's been received, accepted, and everything cleared. But it was there on Friday when I spoke to the team last, where they were saying we're just essentially working out the most efficient, effective, and legal way to get that money to Russia because of sanctions to that company. And we're working with Uralkali, and it's actually quite cordial. And also, to be fair to Uralkali, they said they could have come in and done this just before qualifying. They could have impounded the cars or whatever if they really wanted to. They could have made a huge, huge problem out of it, and created a terrible image for Formula One and for the team, which wouldn't have really been fair in the sense that they've been able to get it sorted very quickly. So I believe we should very soon have official confirmation that has been resolved. But if it hadn't been, then Haas would not have been allowed to leave for Monza until it was.
Yeah,
that's a curious situation. And I know that Haas put their hand up and said, hey, we're ready to pay. We agree to the amount. But because Russia is subject to all these sanctions you mentioned, you can't just pay the Russians $10 million, which is the amount they're looking for, without violating those sanctions arising out of the invasion of Ukraine. So I get that. Why it couldn't have been worked out in such a way? I mean, it's like put the 10 million in escrow, so it's not available to the team. And it's not available to the Russians until all of those diplomatic issues can be worked out. But nevertheless, it came to this, and the bailiffs, who are essentially sheriff's deputies in the Netherlands, came to start taking an itemization of everything, which was curious to me too. Chris, you know the answer to this. Do teams not file lengthy manifests of all the equipment and parts and everything they're bringing into a country so they can take it out again? Or did all that go away with the unified Europe?
So I think that might be part of it. It depends where. And also, so Haas might have had to do that for parts of the car they were bringing from the UK because let's not get stuck into this topic, but the UK did leave the EU. So it might have been partly to do with that. But then at the same time, they've got parts that maybe have come from Italy with Dallara, from Ferrari. They've got engines, obviously. The tyres come from Pirelli. And because that's come from within the EU, that might have moved freely without itemization. So it was just a list of what was essentially available for Uralkali to impound if they wanted to, or the bailiffs to impound. But yeah, I was told actually it was quite nicely handled, and it got all sorted on Thursday night in terms of that itemization. But yeah, an awkward situation, just a bit of an embarrassing one is the way I'd say it. I think it's been a bit of an annoyance that really this should have been long since resolved. It shouldn't have come to this, and I think the team were kind of understandable that Araucali were like, yeah, come on, get on with it now. We've been waiting long enough.
Right. Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Give it to Taylor Swift. She can do anything. She'll solve it.
It's a bit embarrassing, but when you're having to write a check to a Russian oligarch company, I understand the hesitation. So I'll leave the politics at that. How about that?
Right. Yeah. It's not the first time this has happened in Formula One, we should point out. You can go, back to the good old days of the 70s and 80s. There were often threats to impound a team's resources unless they paid their bills, because not paying your bills was once the modus operandi in Formula One. They were considered one of the worst industries in the world in terms of paying bills on time. They were an average of 90 to 120 days late on just about everything.
Yeah. Hey, before we just got 3 or 4 minutes left, but we haven't really talked about Alpine today because not a great qualifying. Pierre Gasly in 10th and Ocon, who was just vociferously complaining about his car, down in 17th. Not a good qualifying. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, the Ocon was really not happy. I think, fair play to Gasly for getting the car where he did. But Ocon was saying that he thought there was something wrong from the start of the weekend, wasn't he? On team radio. I think sometimes you see drivers get a bit paranoid when they're leaving a team. They're no longer the focus and they have a bad weekend. But bad weekends do happen. Teams sometimes don't get the setup right, don't get all of the car in the right window. But I think it must be said, actually, we were talking about it earlier in the session in the media center, actually. Think about where Alpine have come from. They were locking out the back row nice and firmly the first 2 races, and they have made progress. So I think that was more a sign of the progress they'd made than meaning that when they didn't follow that up, they're a bit frustrated.
I suppose that's one of the dangers of this summer break is teams have lots of time for lots of clever people to completely outthink themselves about what needs to be done when we go back to work. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody said, hey, let's try this. And bingo. Yeah.
Hey, speaking of team radio, Fernando Alonso, right at the end of qualifying, he sounded exasperated or just exhausted from qualifying. He said, I cannot do more than this. But he's finished. I mean, he qualified in 7th. Yeah. So, and his teammate, Lance Stroll, in 9th. I think all things considered, not a bad qualifying for Aston Martin.
It certainly could have been worse. When I saw Mike Crack earlier talking to Jack Doohan, I wanted to just grab him to say, you happy with that? Both cars are the top 10. I think Stroll was marginally quicker for much of the session, actually. And then Fernando pulled it out with his final Q3 run. And that wasn't much quicker than what Stroll had done in Q2. But Stroll didn't match that in Q3. Maybe could have been a lack of tyres, actually. But yeah, there was definitely some solid signs because we've seen Aston slip back, haven't we? And that midfield is not hanging around. A number of other teams have brought upgrades, Williams being one with that big upgrade. Aston Martin not really brought anything this weekend. So I think that was a really solid execution of a qualifying session from the 2 Aston Martins. And they'll be looking just to pick up a few points because I believe both Haas and RB have outscored them over the last 5 races.
Yeah, and I think Lance Stroll's best lap was compromised by a couple of snap oversteers. I think he had more in the car and himself. Hey, Chris, before we go, what's the forecast for tomorrow?
Dry but cooler and still a bit breezy.
Yeah, nice.
Okay.
All right. Well, we are out of time. Let me give the times for tomorrow, our pre-race show, and we will be on the air at 7 a.m. Central Time, 8 a.m. Eastern for our pre-race show. And then, of course, the race BBC feed that we'll have for you. And then 1 hour post-race show right after that, starting at approximately 11 a.m. Eastern. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks to Bob Varsha, Chris Medland, and we will talk to you guys tomorrow morning.